Hello there and welcome. Here is another video. And this time we're having a look at my all-time favourite video game, American McGee's Alice. In particular, we are looking at how the game's introduction area, the Village of the Doomed, does a great job at introducing the player to the twisted wonderland of American McGee's Alice, as well as some interesting things that most people may or may not notice. Before we begin, here is some context behind this first level, namely what happened in the story at this point. The game is a spiritual sequel to the original Alice's adventure in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass, with this game setting itself in the mind of Alice Little, rather than Wonderland being a real world, it's imaginary. But whilst Alice enjoys her adventures in Wonderland, the real world comes crashing around her, after her cat knocks over a fire lamp causing a huge fire that ends up burning down her house, with her parents still inside, killing them. Cut to an adult Alice who has spent years in an asylum. She has lost her mind quite literally. But the White Rabbit calls for Alice to return to Wonderland, as she has been away from Wonderland since the fire. She falls down the rabbit hole and ends up in a twisted world, one that seems unfamiliar. And this is where the game begins, the Village of the Doomed. Immediately, Alice is presented in a cramped and claustrophobic environment. Mines that tunnel all around, it representative of her state of mind at this point. The asylum, like the mines, is nothing more than but corridors and cramped spaces. She is like the gnomes, trapped within this corridor of hell. Speaking of the gnomes are emboldened with heavy equipment on their back and locked up with an oversized padlock. They're all dejected, and some seem to have lost their mind, unable to comprehend their situation, slaves working away for a cruel queen. There's even an idle animation which is hard to come across, but shows a gnome standing up straight, attempting to smile before collapsing in defeat. This isn't the happy land that Alice once knew. Now the residents of the world are tortured, with happiness being virtually impossible. The claustrophobic environment makes the inhabitants feel more trapped, as there's seemingly no escape from this hell. Then we see them. The card guards keep watch and ensure the gnomes don't rebel, but something worth interest is how the card guards in the village look. These particular card guards have poorly kept uniforms, suggesting that they are the lower value to the queen, which is why they are in this barren village in the ground. They are so unimportant, they have weak spears, and in terms of gameplay, weaker health. Their only backup are the diamond card guards, who have the weakest projectile weapons, but are slightly higher in ranking. Amazing small story details to show the hierarchy of the Queen's army, and this is only the first area. To further add to this occupation of the mining village, the lack of value these gnomes have is only further highlighted by the use of the lower class soldiers, as if this village is so unimportant and the villagers are so defeated that she can be using lower class personnel without much of a sweat. However, it's this lack of insight that allows the White Rabbit and Cheshire to plan their rebellion and get Alice back to Wonderland. If they had brought Alice to, say, Wonderland Wood or Pale Realm, she'd probably die very quickly. Interestingly, the rabbit shrinks himself and runs away quickly, which shows the urgency of the situation. No questions asked, just get going. Pure action. The village's water supply has become toxic and murky, which reflects how tainted Alice's mind has become. How even the most simplest things like water has been corrupted by the all-consuming darkness that plagues Alice's mind. The corruption of Wonderland is highlighted by the Queen of Hearts herself. Though we don't physically meet the Queen until the very end of the game, her presence is felt throughout. From the way the character talks about her, it seems that she has immense power and control. In fact, we even get a simple glimpse of this through the pink tentacles, the same tentacles of the Queen. Throughout the game, you'll see these tentacles, and these tentacles represent her grip on Wonderland. Her presence is everywhere, and she is always watching, always there, lingering in the background, and for many new players, probably something they'd miss. The music played during the first level is particularly interesting. As many already know, the music was developed by Chris Venera, and utilizes children toys for music. However, in this first area we get a childlike atmosphere, with the music having oohs and ahs, which for me represents the curiosity of the world that Alice has returned to. The music played is more upbeat compared to later music such as Time to Die or The Funhouse or Fire and Brimstone, showing just how this adventure starts with Alice in a weird wonderland, but one that hasn't gotten to the depths it will devolve into. Gameplay-wise, the first area is very simple, but this is important for the player to understand the basics of the game. Almost straight away, there's an air vent which teaches the player to jump and use steam to float. This of course would become useful later on, especially during the Boo Jump level. We also get taught about meta essence. Alice upon landing is hurt slightly. Again, we are taught that this can heal you and you are advised to get as much as you can. The tutorial continues immediately with the Vorpal Blade, which is the first weapon. The weapon is slow to strike but has the bonus of being able to be thrown. Willpower also doesn't drain while in use. The knife is also quickly used to kill 2 car guards, these being the easiest car guards that only take 2 to 3 hits. Continuing into the next area with the rope. Ropes become a common feature in the game, and having a really easy rope to swing from one platform to another helps teach the player about the platforming and the variation in these platformings you can do. We eventually get another weapon, this being the cards, useful for range attacks, giving the player their first homing weapon. However, it also highlights another feature, that being weapons that drain willpower. Whilst the knife does not drain your willpower, the cards do, which teach the player that you must be resourceful during your ventures during this game. Even the enemies change. We go from an enemy that can only attack from close range, the club car guards, while the diamond car guards fire projectiles at the player. It goes to show that the game will feature various types of enemies that can attack either from close range or from afar. This means the player needs to adapt weaponry to defeat these type of enemies. Maybe the cards are better for far away enemies, but the knife is better for more damage. Overall, the level layout is very simple. It's more or less a straight line from point A to point B. This simple and short linear path is often interrupted with characters dispelling lore or platforming. The simplicity is meant to teach the player and essentially give them handlebars as they are forced to go forward and never turn back. It's easy, sure, but it gives a clue to the story-driven and linear playthrough that the majority levels go through. Though they can get more complex, it's still more or less a linear game. Again, this area serves as an introduction to this world, as well as a tutorial for the game as it sets out to be. Overall, this first area of the game does a fantastic job at setting out the atmosphere from the get-go, teach the player what's to come, and most importantly, it sets up the story with the side characters and the environment. It's worth noting that this is probably the only area in the entire game that dispels a lot of lore in one go. The rest of the game, there's less talking and more action. The area allows the player to experience the Twisted Wonderland from a glimpse, but enough to gain a full picture. This game uses visual storytelling and gameplay effectively to make the game experience all the more atmospheric. Through visual storytelling and gameplay, you get a very easy picture of how bad things are in Wonderland, and why Alice needs to save the day, and why the Queen of Hearts is so evil. This game manages to do this all in the first area alone. Hope you enjoyed this edition or this video about American McGee's as an analysis of the Village of the Doomed. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you next time.